Hey guys, in this video we're talking about monetary policy and the ASAD model, kind of teaching monetary policy through that ASAD model. And here at Econ Busters, we're trying to shift the paradigm on how we teach monetary policy with this model. Now this is our third video in this series, and in this one we're going back to talking about contractionary monetary policy, or what we like to call restrictive monetary policy. That's what the financial news usually calls it, restrictive policy, and the idea of the soft landing, okay? So we're in May of 2024, so what we have had over the last couple of years is a situation where the inflation rate got way above target. And the Fed has gone through a process of disinflation, bringing a high inflation rate down. The inflation rate, of course, remaining positive, the price level continuing to climb the whole way, but they've done restrictive monetary policy or contractionary monetary policy in attempts to bring that inflation rate down, and they're trying to negotiate the soft landing, okay? Now, I want to point at this graph first, okay? And the way I was going to draw it originally, and actually did for a moment, was I put real GDP, and then I had my potential GDP line, and I had my normal business cycle, and it looked a lot like this, except for my potential GDP had an upward trajectory to it, and it looked very much the same way, where what we're doing is we come off of a peak, and we're trying to negotiate that soft landing. This arrow right here, we're just trying to bring it in right on the potential GDP. Now again, this is not potential GDP. I'll get to this particular graph, but it looked very much the same. And then we have what we call the no landing situation, where we're trying to bring it in right on real GDP, but instead the economy begins to reaccelerate earlier. Or the hard landing. You hear a lot about that, where the Fed is trying to bring down that high inflation rate by contracting the economy, and we go into a recession. Now I know I'm being a little bit confusing because, again, in my mind, I had originally here real GDP, and these lines had to do with real GDP, okay? A real GDP potential, and then of course the no landing and the hard landing. But I decided to change it to the inflation rate, okay? One, in this last episode of disinflation, we didn't really have a contracting real GDP. But we still have the same idea. And I want you to kind of, in your own mind, go back and forth between thinking this as a real GDP situation, so real GDP being measured and trying to land it right on that potential GDP, or just the inflation rate, where the red line is now the inflationary target of the Fed. And again, you still have the no landing, where the economy reheats and the inflation rate stays high, okay, where it could move sideways for a little while and then potentially even move back up. That's the no landing situation. Or again, the hard landing, where we try to bring us down to target, but we continue to go right through the target. And usually when you get below that 2%, not always, but if you're coming off of that big peak and you continue to go down, you can get into a recession, okay? So I know I'm asking you kind of do a little bit weird thing where you're kind of like looking at this in two different ways, but it's just a graphical representation of what you hear people talk about in regards to the soft landing. And here's the big thing in both ways of seeing this graph, is how when we bring that inflation rate down, there's going to be this period of kind of leveling out, or at least that this rate of decline slows, okay? And we want to, again, land it. That's what people mean, is there's going to be this period where you've got to like land that plane, if you will, on that 2% target. And of course, right off the bat, you think that's incredibly difficult, and it is, and that's why it's so difficult for the Fed to do what it's doing. On top of that, monetary policy has these large lags, which makes it incredibly difficult to land just right there on the 2% target. And that's why you're going to get a lot of noise here, and a lot of situations, or a lot of data that comes out on a monthly basis that might not completely jive with this. And we've just gone through a few months, besides the last CPI print, where we had kind of the inflation rate moving sideways and not coming down the way that we wanted to. Now, maybe that was just noise the first 3 months out of the year, or maybe it really shows a no landing scenario maybe coming to fruition. Now, let's get to the ASAD model and the new paradigm that we have for teaching it, which is we've got an AD original, okay, so original AD curve. We've always had that when teaching monetary policy, but then we have these two other AD curves. And I'm showing restrictive monetary policy or contractionary monetary policy. I have a target rate AD, that's the Fed's current target rate, which today is between 5.25 and 5.5 for the federal funds rate, okay? A target rate of 5.25 to 5.5, that's their range, okay, for the federal funds rate, which is their policy rate, their way of transmitting interest rate changes to the broader economy. But then you have the R star AD, okay? The R star is the neutral interest rate. It's a situation where the Fed is not being accommodative, expansionary, nor restrictive, contractionary, okay? That's our neutral rate. It's in the long run, the interest rate, again, where the inflation rate shouldn't increase nor decrease, or the unemployment increase or decrease, okay? It's consistent with staying at full employment, this concept of the R star. Now, the Fed would say currently their federal funds rate being at 5.25 to 5.5, and again, I'm talking in nominal terms, is above, okay, now I know my AD curve's back here, but this is so important to understand. Their targeted federal funds rate is above the R star rate, so they're being restrictive. They're restricting growth, right? They're keeping interest rates elevated above the neutral rate and restricting AD, which is total spending. Aggregate demand is our total spending line. So instead of AD or total spending increasing by that much, it's only increasing by this much. Now, one thing we like under this new paradigm is you can still see the price level going up, which the Fed always wants to happen. That's right. Even when they're fighting high inflation rates, they always want the price level to go up. They never want to cause the price level to go down. They never want deflation. And that's why we don't love the old paradigm for teaching contractionary monetary policy, which is shifting AD to the left and showing the price level going down. So in this situation, we got that price level going up, but just not as much. They're being restrictive. They're restraining the growth of the economy. You've also got real GDP expanding, but not as much as it would if we went with the R star, because again, their target rate is higher than the R star and they are restricting spending. Now, here's the thing, guys. Monetary policy has these big lags, and the Fed knows this, okay? These lags can take a lot of time, so when they change interest rates, it could take a long time for that to play out. So what they actually did several months ago with the federal funds rate, when they got to what may be the, quote, terminal rate, the highest they're bringing the federal funds rate, is that's going to play out over several months, and maybe even longer than a year. It could play out over a year or even 2 years. So they need to be thinking that, and of course they are thinking that. They understand very well that monetary policy plays out with lags, and they're trying to negotiate this landing right here. So they've seen this incredible progress, and then right here we're going to say the Fed pivoted. And why they pivoted is they were worried about the hard landing. They were worried about bringing us into a recession by keeping these rates high. So what they first did is they did forward guidance, okay? They pivoted in their language, not in actually changing the interest rate, just in their language. They did this at the end of 2023. They said, hey, we are now looking to reduce rates. And they had a dot plot, which is just showing what their committee members think is going to happen to the interest rate. And that showed these interest rate cuts. And again, why they were going to cut the interest rate is they thought they were significantly restrictive, and the inflation rate coming down as well as it did, the progress that they had on the inflation rate was verifying to them that they were absolutely restrictive, okay, that they had been restrictive. And here is one of the reasons we like this new paradigm is what it allows for is you could be at a targeted rate, okay, for your federal funds rate, again, which is above the R star, okay, that neutral rate of interest. So you're being restrictive. And then what you can do is begin to lower the targeted rate, right? They could go from a range of 5.25 to 5.5 to a range of 5.0 to 5.25, and then a range of 4.75 to 5.0. And as they do that, they're becoming less restrictive. So we move the AD to the right, but the important thing to realize is AD is still being constrained. They're remaining restrictive, okay? They're still trying to bring down the inflation rate, but they're trying to ease the degree to which they do restrictive policy. It allows for nuance in the way that we teach monetary policy. So what they were thinking is they were thinking, look, I understand that monetary policy acts with these big lags. We've had this significant progress verifying that we have had a restrictive targeted rate. And what we need to do is we need to pivot, and first pivot in language and then pivot in action, and eventually begin to reduce that targeted rate. And again, that is just becoming less restrictive and allowing that AD to move closer and closer and closer to the AD as they try to negotiate, again, the soft landing, right? They're trying to land it right there. Whether you think it on the 2% inflation rate target, or again, if we change this over to real GDP and this becomes the GDP potential, we just kind of tick up that red line a little bit, okay? And we still have the same looking arrows here, trying to land it right on that, trying to not have the recession, but also not have the no landing. Their job is incredibly difficult, okay? They're trying to land this plane called the United States economy with a tool that has major lags in it, okay? And so it's a very difficult process, and that is what they're doing. So they pivoted in language, and what we actually had was some sideways movement in the inflation rate at the beginning of the year. And so what they did is they stayed there. In fact, they tried to dial back their language a little bit. They actually never lowered the targeted rate. They stayed restrictive. They continued to remain restrictive, okay, because they saw that purple line emerge and they said, can't do that. But again, they're realizing, wait a second, could this just be noise? Could this just be 3 months of noise in the data? Again, the last inflation rate print was showing cooling again. And what they don't want is at some point there's this turn in the economy where it actually looks like a hard landing because they're working with lags. And if they let this manifest too much, then they know by dropping rates significantly, that will also have a lag to bring the economy back up. They want the soft landing. They're trying to moderate the business cycle. What they don't want are these big swings, right? They're trying to moderate things. That's the soft landing. And that's a way that we can teach this concept of monetary policy, having a restrictive stance, and then easing, but remaining restrictive and allowing our students to understand that yes, the Fed is easing right now, but they're remaining restrictive by showing our AD targeted rate being to the left of AD star. Of course, if they ever wanted to truly become expansionary or stimulative, if this hard landing really began to show itself, then their targeted rate would go below R star, and AD, we would move that to the right of that AD R star. Anyhow, hope that makes sense to you. Hope that brings that jargon of no landing, soft landing, hard landing a little bit into some more clarity for us. And I hope to see you in a future video. See you next time.